The title says 2033. The Congressional Budget Office already updated that to 2032 in February of 2026, after accounting for legislation that passed in 2025. When the trust fund hits zero, and I am going to spend the next 20 plus minutes showing you exactly how that clock works, your Social Security check does not stop. The program only pays what it collects. That means a cut to 77 cents on every promised dollar, automatically, under existing law. No congressional vote required, no appeal. For a typical couple retiring right at the moment of insolvency, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that is $16,500 less per year in benefits permanently. And here is the part that does not make the headline. The size of that cut in real dollar terms depends entirely on a decision you are probably making right now, the age at which you plan to claim. I am going to show you the math on that, and it is going to change how you think about every retirement decision you are stacking up in your head. Here is the thing about Social Security. It is the most documented, slow-motion financial crisis in American history. The trustees of the Social Security and Medicare trust funds report on the current and projected financial status of the two programs each year. The government publishes the math every June. Independent actuaries check the math. Congress gets briefed on the math, and then nothing happens. For structural reasons I want to get into, while the numbers get slightly worse each year and the window to fix things painlessly gets slightly smaller, I find the whole situation less infuriating than genuinely fascinating. Because understanding why intelligent people do nothing in the face of a predictable problem is actually more useful to you than just knowing the problem exists. So here's what this video is. First, the actual mechanics of how this thing runs out of money, because most explanations get this slightly wrong in a way that completely changes your planning. Second, the political incentive structure that has kept this unfixed for decades, and why the incentives just got measurably worse in the last 12 months. Third, the single biggest mistake most people make when they hear this news, and it is not the mistake you think. And fourth, what the evidence says actually works. Specific, not general. Numbers, not vibes. The bucket. Every paycheck you have ever received, 6.2% of it went into a giant communal fund. Your employer matched that with another 6.2%. Self-employed individuals pay the entire 12.4% themselves. That fund is called the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund. Workers pour in, retirees pull out. Simple enough. For most of Social Security's history, enough workers were pouring in to cover what retirees were pulling out, with money left over. The bucket grew. Trust fund asset reserves peaked at $2.9 to $1 trillion in 2021. Then the bucket started draining. Social Security's cost has exceeded its non-interest income since 2010. That is the slow leak. The reserves of the combined OASI and DI trust funds declined by $67 billion in 2024 to a total of $2.7 to $2 trillion. The total annual cost of the program is projected to exceed total annual income in 2025 and remain higher throughout the 75-year projection period. And the combined shortfall over the next decade alone is not a rounding error. Over the next 10 years, Social Security's deficits will total $3.6 trillion. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will be able to pay 100% of total scheduled benefits until 2033. At that time, the fund's reserves will become depleted, and continuing program income will be sufficient to pay 77% of total scheduled benefits. That is the official Social Security Administration number as of the 2025 Trustees Report, released June 18th, 2025. The Congressional Budget Office, working with updated economic assumptions after the legislation passed in 2025, projects the OAC Trust Fund depleted by 2032, a deadline pulled forward a year from the CBO's last projection and 2 years from its 2024 outlook. 6 years, maybe 7. That is the runway you are operating on. Let me introduce Dennis. Dennis is 52 years old. He has a reasonable 401k, somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. He is planning to retire at 62 in 2035. And his mental model of retirement is simple. Claim Social Security at 62, supplement with 401k withdrawals, and call it done. I am going to come back to Dennis several times in this video because his plan has a very specific structural flaw that illustrates everything I want to explain. Think about whether your own plan has the same shape. In a few minutes, I am going to show you the single variable that determines how much a 23% cut actually costs you in real monthly dollars. And the answer is counterintuitive enough that most financial advisors do not lead with. So first, I need to show you why the structural problem with Social Security is harder than a political problem. Because people keep waiting for a political solution to a demographic math equation, and that confusion is costing them. Here is what I mean. Most people's mental model of this issue goes like this. Politicians cannot agree on a fix, so the fund slowly runs low, and eventually benefits get trimmed a little. That is the polite version, the one that makes it sound like a technical inconvenience waiting for the right congressional session. The problem, if that were the real story, would be purely political. Fix the politics, fix the problem. But the politics are downstream of demographics, and the demographics are structural. When Social Security launched in 1935, the retirement age was 65. The increase in cost results not because we are living longer, but because birth rates dropped from 3 to 2 children per woman. The program was originally designed as insurance against the relatively rare event of living long enough to stop working. In 1960, there were more than 5 workers paying Social Security taxes per beneficiary. The bucket was almost impossible to drain faster than it was being filled. That ratio is now below 3 to 1. The ratio of OASD beneficiaries per 100 covered workers is projected to be higher than it was in the 2024 annual report. The 2025 report projected an average of 46.2 beneficiaries per 100 covered workers over the 75-year projection versus 45.5 in last year's report. More mouths pulling from the bucket, fewer hands pouring in. You think the problem is that politicians cannot agree on a fix. But actually the problem is that the program was designed for a demographic reality that no longer exists. And that reality is not coming back. Birth rates are not bouncing back to 3 per woman. The baby boom generation, the largest birth cohort in American history, started retiring in the early 2010s. The ratio of contributors to recipients is going in one direction. The bucket doesn't care about your ballot. And the reason this matters for your planning is that it tells you something important about how to estimate the probability of a fix. If this were purely a political problem, a failure of will in a good economy, you might reasonably bet on Congress finding the courage before the deadline. But if it is a structural demographic problem requiring genuine sacrifice from groups that vote, the probability of inaction is higher than most people are gaming out. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Now here's the part of this story that is more recent, more specific, and more cynical than the demographic slide, and it changes the timeline. In a moment, I am going to show you the most important number most people get wrong about the claiming decision. But first, Congress just made this worse, twice in 12 months. The Social Security Fairness Act was signed on January 5th, 2025. It repealed the windfall elimination and government pension offset provisions of the Social Security Act. The repeal increased projected Social Security benefit levels for some workers relative to projected benefit levels in last year's report. The impact of this legislation on the OASD Trust Fund was the primary contributor to the change in the combined OASD fund depletion date. That legislation is projected to add nearly $200 billion to the program's shortfall over the next 10 years alone. And then came the One Big Beautiful Bill, signed on July 4th, 2025, which I'll let you sit with that date for a second. The bill included a new $6,000 deduction for seniors. Since bipartisan reform in 1983, the Social Security system has been supported by a dedicated revenue stream generated from federal income taxation of benefits. This is not general revenue that can be used for any government purpose. By law, these tax revenues are deposited directly into the Social Security trust funds. The senior deduction in the One Big Beautiful Bill reduces the number of retirees who pay federal income tax on their Social Security benefits, which means less of that dedicated revenue flowing back into the bucket. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimated that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act's tax policy changes would result in those depletion dates moving up from early 2033 to late 2032 for Social Security's Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund. A closer look at just the OAC Trust Fund found its reserve depletion date could accelerate from the first quarter of 2033 to the fourth quarter of 2032. This creates a feedback loop. A short-term targeted tax cut for some current retirees is financed in a way that could result in a larger permanent benefit reduction for all future retirees, including those who receive the initial tax break. A senior who is 70 years old in 2025 and benefits from the tax deduction will, upon turning 77 in 2032, to be subject to the 24% benefit reduction that the tax break helped accelerate, according to CRFB projections. The bucket doesn't care about your ballot. And this is the part I find genuinely remarkable as a systems thinker. The same legislative session that passed a benefit expansion in January and a revenue reduction in July is the session in which both sides publicly pledged never to cut Social Security. Technically true. No one voted to cut it. The clock moved on its own. At this point, I need to mention something about the 2025 Trustees Report that even most financial professionals miss. The 2025 report is based on economic assumptions set in December 2024. New tax proposals, tariffs, and deportations were not included, and these three developments may pose serious threats to Social Security's financing. The Trump administration's policy toward immigration, through raids, deportations, and the effective closing of the border, has dried up flows of potential new workers. Based on revised assumptions, Social Security and Medicare could lose approximately $4 billion in 2025, rising to $27 billion annually in 2034, compared to current projections. The model we are all reading does not include any of that. The actual depletion date is likely earlier than what is being published. Now, here's the knowledge most people are missing, and this is where Dennis's plan falls apart. The psychological response to hearing Social Security benefits will be cut 23% in 2032 is almost always the same. People decide to claim early. The logic sounds bulletproof. If benefits are going to get cut, lock in your benefits now, before the cut. Claim at 62. Get your money while the getting is good. This is exactly backwards. Let me show you why with numbers, not intuition. When the trust fund depletes, the cut does not come off the top of some abstract maximum benefit. It is applied to whatever benefit you are currently receiving at that moment. Roughly 72 million recipients of Social Security's old age and survivors benefits will be subject to automatic cuts. Those cuts will apply to all recipients, regardless of whether they are 65 or 95 years old, or whether they have $20,000 or $200,000 in annual income. For someone with a full retirement age benefit of $2,000 per month, claiming at 62 produces approximately $1,400 per month. Claiming at 70 produces approximately $2,480 per month, a 77% difference in monthly income for the same earnings history. Now, apply the cut to both scenarios. 1,400 minus 23% is $1,078. 2,480 minus 23% is $1,909, $831 per month, every single month for the rest of your life. The delayed claimer takes the same percentage cut and comes out $831 ahead monthly, because the cut is hitting a base that is 77% larger. For every year a person delays from full retirement age to age 70, they stand to boost their benefits by 8%, a return that is difficult to match elsewhere, such as in the stock market where there are no guarantees the money will go up. And because Social Security benefits are inflation adjusted for life, that larger base means every future cost of living adjustment is applied to a higher number. The compounding goes in your favor permanently. Research shows many people do not wait until age 70 to claim. While more than 90% of people would benefit from waiting until 70, only about 10% of beneficiaries do, according to a 2022 report from the National Bureau of Economic Research. Why does this happen? 3 behavioral patterns operating simultaneously. First, loss aversion. The money you could be receiving right now feels more real than the larger money you would receive later, a bird in hand. Second, what researchers call mortality salience. The moment people start seriously planning retirement, they begin privately catastrophizing about dying young, which makes claiming early feel like the rational hedge even when the actuarial math runs the other direction. Third, the insolvency news itself creates a perverse feedback loop. More people are claiming Social Security earlier, in large part over concerns about the program's financial health, according to recent research by the Urban Institute and AARP. The very headlines about the fund running out are accelerating the behavior that is financially worst for the people most worried. New data shows that not only will Social Security claims increase in 2025, but higher earners may also be claiming early, especially at age 62. The people who need Social Security least are the ones most likely to be making this mistake. The bucket doesn't care about your anxiety. Knowing these numbers and building a systematic plan around them are genuinely two different things. I have seen people track the trustees' report for years. They understand the demographic collapse. They know the 2032 timeline, and they have not changed a single decision about when they plan to claim. Information without a framework does not change behavior. That is why I built the Exit Code. It is a digital book, 8 chapters, built on 50 years of actual retirement data, no filler. The part most directly relevant to everything I have covered in this video is what I call the Social Security Bridge Calculation, a mathematical framework for figuring out how much you need in retirement assets to bridge from your planned retirement age to age 70, so you can delay claiming without depleting your portfolio in a down market. The framework accounts for sequence of returns risk, tax drag on withdrawals, and the specific depletion scenario we have discussed what your check looks like if the cut hits during your bridge period. It also covers the 58% rule, named after the finding that roughly 58% of Americans are forced to retire earlier than planned, typically due to health events or job loss. Your bridge plan needs a buffer for that contingency, and most calculators do not model it. The Exit Code also replaces the 4% rule with what I call the dynamic withdrawal method, an evidence-based approach that adjusts to market conditions and Social Security timing rather than applying a static percentage that was derived from 30-year data that does not match your actual situation. You can get all of it for less than one dinner out through the link in the description. Every year you delay getting this framework in place is a year of compounding that works against you, not because of marketing pressure, but because your remaining years are literally the input variable in the break-even math. Back to Dennis. Dennis is 52. He retires at 62 in 2035. Under the CBO's current projections, he retires approximately 3 years after the trust fund runs dry. He will have been collecting his already 30% reduced early claiming benefit for 3 years when the additional automatic cut hits whatever he is receiving at that moment. Let me put current numbers on this. The average Social Security monthly check for retired workers reached $2,081.16 in April 2026. But Dennis earns above average, so let's say his full retirement age benefit would be $2,400 per month. At 62, after the 30% early claiming reduction, $1,680 per month. 3 years into his retirement, the 23% automatic cut is applied to what he is currently receiving, $1,293 per month. Now the comparison. Dennis waits until 70. His monthly benefit at 70 is $2,992 per month. The same $2,400 compounded at 8% per year for 3 years of delayed retirement credits. The 23% cut hits $2,314 per month, $1,021 more than Dennis's early claiming scenario every single month. For 20 or more years of retirement, if you live to 85, that difference compounds to hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional Social Security income. Even accounting for the extra withdrawals during the bridge period, you come out significantly ahead. Dennis's 401k does not have to work as hard, which reduces his exposure to sequence of returns, risk the #1 portfolio killer in early retirement. The whole retirement math changes. Dennis's problem is not that he is making a naive choice. Dennis's problem is that the framing he is using, claim early, lock in benefits before the cut, sounds logical and is factually backwards, and nobody in Dennis's life is running the numbers with him. Consistently, 80 to 90% of retirees have noted that their Social Security check is necessary in some capacity to cover their expenses, which means the size of that check is the most important single variable in most people's retirement income. And most people are making that decision based on a mental shortcut rather than math. Now, let me tell you what the fix actually looks like, because this is underreported in a way that affects how you should think about the probability of Congress acting. The fix is not mysterious. The actuaries have published the menu of options for 30 years. To illustrate the magnitude of changes needed to make Social Security solvent over the next 75 years, the trustees estimate the hypothetical payroll tax increase or hypothetical benefit reduction needed to maintain solvency. The payroll tax fix raised the combined rate from 12.4% to approximately 14.4%, 2 percentage points. On a $50,000 salary, that is $500 extra per year from the worker. The cap fix, in 2026, the maximum amount of earnings subject to Social Security tax rose to $184,500. Any income above that cap is completely exempt from Social Security tax right now. A surgeon earning $600,000 pays Social Security tax on the first $184,000, $500 on the rest. Eliminating the Social Security tax cap while providing benefit credit for those earnings would raise an additional $3.2 trillion over 10 years, closing 53% of the trust fund's 75-year funding gap. None of these options requires discovering new math. They require political courage in an election year. And here is the 1983 lesson that everyone cites, but nobody reads carefully. By the early 80s, the crisis was no longer a distant projection. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund was projected to be unable to make timely payments by as early as July 1983. Checks would stop, the promise would be broken, the political and social fallout would have been catastrophic. The final deal was struck in secret. Last-minute negotiations in January 1983 between top Reagan administration officials and Speaker O'Neill's team. They embraced a philosophy of shared sacrifice. There would be no single painful solution. Instead, the burden would be distributed across multiple groups: current workers, future workers, current retirees, and the government itself. The 1983 agreement extended solvency by raising the retirement age to 67 from 65 over decades, imposing a 6-month delay in the cost of living adjustment, and requiring government employees to pay into Social Security for the first time. The 1983 amendments are credited with extending the solvency of the system by approximately 50 years. Here's the part almost nobody mentions when they invoke 1983 as proof that Congress will act again. This legislation was not a hard political choice, because the consequences were phased in such that the group most affected were non-voters. The largest tax increases and the maximum benefit cuts targeted people who were 11 and younger at the time. The political calculus behind the bipartisan compromise is simple. 11-year-olds cannot vote. That playbook is now significantly harder to run. The deferred pain population from 1983 is now in their 50s. They are watching. They vote at the highest rates of any demographic. Every option on the menu today: raise payroll taxes, raise the retirement age further, means test benefits for higher earners, hits a group that shows up on election day. The political incentive structure in 2032 is fundamentally different from the one in 1983. And that matters for how much probability you should assign to a timely fix. This is also where I want to address the "but they always find a way" argument directly. It is true that Social Security has never missed a payment. It is true that the 1983 crisis was resolved. It is also true that the longer Congress waits to act, the harder solving Social Security's financial challenge becomes, and the more retirees and taxpayers are on the hook for lawmakers' inaction. The difficulty of the fix increases geometrically as the deadline approaches, because more of the gradual phase-in options disappear, and the only remaining options are sharp, visible, politically toxic ones. Lawmakers are running out of time to phase in changes gradually and avoid harsh cuts, sharp tax increases, or unacceptable borrowing. I am not saying Congress will fail. I am saying the probability of failure is materially higher than most people are modeling. And your individual strategy should reflect the real distribution of outcomes, not the optimistic single scenario assumption. A quick aside here. The Social Security trustees are legally required to publish an annual report telling Congress exactly what is happening and what needs to be done. The 2025 report recommends that lawmakers address the projected trust fund shortfalls in a timely way in order to phase in necessary changes gradually and give workers and beneficiaries time to adjust their expectations and behavior. This is the most gently worded alarm in the history of official documents. 40 years of in a timely way. If your accountant sent you a letter every year for 40 years saying your savings were on track to run out, and the only advice was address it in a timely way, you would find a new accountant. Under current law, Social Security cannot pay benefits. It does not have the revenue to support. Once the OAZ trust fund reserves are exhausted, benefits will automatically be limited to incoming revenue, resulting in a roughly 23% benefit cut for all retirement and survivor benefits. Refusal to work towards Social Security reform is effectively endorsing across-the-board benefit cuts. Every politician who stands at a podium and says, "I will never cut Social Security," is technically telling the truth. They do not have to vote for it. They have to vote for nothing. The bucket drains on its own. 58% of retired Americans say Social Security is a major source of their retirement income, making this cut structurally different from any market correction. Market corrections hit your portfolio. This cut hits a guaranteed inflation-adjusted income stream that was supposed to be the floor of your retirement. Without Social Security, 22 million more adults and children would live below the poverty level. This is not an abstraction. It is a legal mechanism built into the statute that activates the moment the bucket hits zero. Here are the 3 things you should actually do. These are not generic. They are calibrated to this specific structural problem. 1. Run your break-even calculation on delayed claiming with the cut scenario in the model, not the generic wait until 70 advice, the specific math for your income level. Take your projected full retirement age benefit. Calculate the 30% early claiming reduction at 62. Calculate the 8% per year delay credits at 70. Then apply a 23% cut to both outcomes and compare them across your projected retirement years. The break-even point for delaying from 62 to 70 is typically somewhere in your late 70s to early 80s. The average life expectancy for a US adult who reaches age 65 is approximately 83 for men and 86 for women. Most people who actually do this calculation change their plan. 2. Build your bridge estimate with the depletion scenario in it. If you are planning to bridge from retirement to age 70 to delay claiming, your bridge assets need to account for the possibility that your Social Security check, when it starts, is 23% below what the current SSA estimate says. That means your bridge funds slightly more retirement income than you might have assumed. The difference in practice is usually a few extra months of savings cushion. But if you have not modeled it explicitly, you are planning toward a number that may not exist. Research from the Bipartisan Policy Center confirms that for people who live to average life expectancy or beyond, using assets to delay Social Security, claiming results in more wealth preservation than claiming early. 3. Stop treating Social Security as a variable you can optimize around political outcomes. You cannot time Congress. The people who delayed retirement planning while waiting to see how this resolved are now 6 years closer to the depletion date with the same savings rate they had before. The math of this problem does not pause while you wait for clarity. The only things fully in your control are the size of your bridge, the age at which you claim, and the portfolio structure that funds the gap. Those decisions compound for or against you every year, independent of what happens in Washington. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And one final thing. The people in Washington who are responsible for resolving this problem receive their own retirement income from the federal employees' retirement system, a completely separate program that is not affected by Social Security trust. fund depletion. The people deciding whether to fix your retirement security are personally insulated from the consequences of not fixing it. The bucket doesn't care about their ballot either.